See, in this particular session, we'll be seeing how do we read the data from the databases. Okay, so as I say, database is nothing but a platform where I can store and manage a very, very large amount of data. And if you want to read the data from the database, we generally use the SQL queries to read the data. And in the database, the data will be stored in the form of tables. Okay, tables or views and things. So through with the help of which we try to write a SQL query to read the data from this particular tables database. Now, if I have to read the data from the database, like how we used to use the different libraries for reading the data from the CSV file, Excel file, and all these things, the same way we have some libraries to interact with the database and to read the data from the database. So here in this particular thing, so we are going to use this SQL Alchemy library called as SQL Alchemy. Okay, so now when I look into this particular thing, so this alchemy library, so this helps you in establishing a connection to the database, passing a queries to the database, and then reading that particular data from the database. So we are going to import this particular SQL Alchemy. So just like how do we import this particular library? So we just get into the files, okay, settings, and so the way to download this particular library, so we just get into the file settings, just like how we downloaded the pandas numpy library. So we'll be importing this library also. Okay, so now when you go to the file, this one interpreter, so there we can just use the plus sign. So you can see when I hit on this particular plus sign, so I'll just get a window, so where we can just write this as SQL Alchemy. Yeah, so you can see here, so we need to import this particular library called as SQL Alchemy. So I have already imported, so it shows in the blue color. Okay, so you can see it shows blue color. If it is not imported, so we just need to select this and then install this particular package. Okay, so we need to import this particular package. So now I have already imported. So after installing this package, we just say import SQL Alchemy. So that means we are including a reference of this particular package. Now, in this one, the first thing what I will do here is I'll create an engine to establish a connection to the database. See, here we are trying to interact with the database. So when I talk about a database, we have many databases. We have MySQL, we have Oracle, we have Microsoft SQL Server, PostgreSQL, and thing. Okay, so now first we need to establish a connection to the database. When I say establish a connection to the database, so usually like, if I have to open any database, MySQL or Oracle or anything, the first thing is I need to know the server name, okay, where this particular database is stored. The second thing is I need to know the authentication of this particular thing, that is the username and password. The third thing, I need to know which database I'm going to work. So then we get connected and we work on that respective database. Now, the same way here, when you're getting connected to any database through my Python code, so here I'm creating an engine. Okay, so first I'm creating a new engine here. So to create the engine, I just say SQL Alchemy, that is the library that you have imported, dot create engine. So this particular library has this method called as create engine. This is going to create an engine. Engine is for establishing a connection to the database. So when you are creating the engine, we pass a different parameter. The first thing is here is the driver. Driver is, see what database you are getting connected to. So we just say is, we say like what database you're getting connected to. See, if I'm connecting to MySQL, we have a different drivers. If you're connecting to Oracle, we have a different drivers, because different database, they have their own way of understanding the commands and all these things. So in that particular case, so we need to write the codes in accordingly. Okay, and then first is your driver, and the second thing is I have specified this particular, see, each parameter is separated with a colon. Okay, so this is nothing but my root uh, yeah. So when I say this is my driver, this is my username, username to the computer, and this is 1234 is my password. So whatever the password is there for that particular server, how you get connected to the database, we specify. And here we have this particular @localhost. This is the server name of the computer where this particular computer is present. So since I'm using to the database which is present in my main machine, in the same machine, so I'll just say it as localhost. A server location, or you can just say it's a server name where the database is present, that particular machine name. Then when you look into this 3306, this is nothing but is a port number. You can see again colon separator and this one. So this is nothing but it is the port number. Fine. And then the last parameter, what we see here, this is nothing but your database name. Name to that we are getting connected for. So that means to establish a connection, I need to pass all this information, okay, to the create engine method of the SQLalchemy. So one is your driver, so which says to which database you're getting connected, then the username and the password of the database, and the name of that particular database. So if it is present in the same machine, so we specify as a local host. If the database generally will be present on a different machine, so the IP address of that machine where the database is present, or if it is a domain name is there, so respective domain name, whatever the name is assigned, so we need to specify that. And then the port number, the port through which this particular database listens. The default port for MySQL is 3306, but if you're assigned with a different port, we need to specify the respective port number. The last parameter is the name of the database. So it says to which database you're getting connected. So what tables you're going to access. This database will have a collection of tables. So we provide this particular inputs, and then we get establish the connection to the database. Once you have connected here, so what is that? So using this parameter, we just establish the connection. If all this particular information is correct, if the server is running, the authentication is perfect, so then this code will be successfully created. It creates an engine. So after it creates the engine, I'll just say data frame is equal to pandas dot read SQL table. So it is going to read the table. So where we are just trying to say what table you want to read. I want to read the products table, and now this products table, where it is going to be read. So it has to know in which database it is present. So we just specify engine. So that is the engine that we have been created before. So that means in my database, I have a products table. So that table, to read a table, so we just say pandas dot read SQL table. This is a method to access a particular table of your database. That whole table will be read into this particular data frame and we'll try to display. So before that, I'll open my MySQL.
Sir, is engine a keyword?
Yeah. So I'm opening my database here. So I just open my MySQL workbench. So under MySQL workbench, you can see we have this particular database Northwind. Under Northwind, you can see we have the tables here. Now to access this particular, you can see here we have a table called as products. So you can see in this table, we have a table called as products. Okay. So if you want to see this particular products, so when you see here in my Northwind database, okay, I have a table by named as products, and this is the data what is there in my products table. We have a product ID, the name of the product, supplier, category ID, supplier ID, unit price, units in stock, all this information about the products. Now I want to read this particular data. So into my, that means the whole table I want to read. If I have to read the whole table, so I just specify the name of the tables. I'm not even writing this SQL query here because the method that I'm using is read SQL table. So directly we are passing the name of the table. That whole table will be read. And okay, so where it is going to be read, it is reading into the data frame. Now let us print this particular data frame. So you can see after reading your data frame, it will be filled like this. The whole table, whatever we saw there, the same table will be read into my data frame and then printing this particular data frame. Yeah. So you can see here, we have a product ID, we have a product name. Okay, we have many columns here. Okay, reorder level discount. So in between there's many columns, and you can see totally we have 78 rows and 10 columns. So that means here when you see here we have 78 rows. Yes. Okay. And when you look into the columns, we have 10 columns like this. Fine. Okay.
Fine, sir.
Now, say example, I want to read with the help of the queries. See, in the database, when you want to access any data, so what is that we do? We write a query to access the data. Suppose like I want to see the data from the, say, products table itself. So what is that we do? We just say select star from products. So products is one of the table, what is present in the Northwind. I just select this particular table and then say run. And you can see we are getting this. So I want to access with the help of the query. So what is the advantage of this is I don't want to get all the fields. I want to get only some selected fields. Say I want to get the product ID, say product name, say unit price. I want to know what is the units in stock. Okay, fine. I just want to read this particular data only. I can just select this and run this. It just shows me only that data. So this get a kind of flexibility you get, even the where clause and all this thing. So in that case, so instead of reading the whole table, I want to get read based using the query. So for that, so what is that we do is we have this thing called as data frame is equal to pandas dot, we had that read underscore SQL underscore table. So the same way we have read underscore SQL query. We have this particular read SQL. So when I read this particular SQL, I can mention the query. So the query can be given like this. I just say, so as a string, I just say select star from products table. And this particular query, where it has to run in the engine. So then let me print this particular data frame. I think I'll comment this. So now you can see again, you'll get the same data. So instead of writing a table name, so I'm writing a query. So this means you get a plus point is like, I don't want to get all the fields. I just want to get the selected fields. I can write this particular. So the kind of query that we are writing here, the same query, I'll write it there also. So when I run this, now you can see you'll get only these three columns: product ID, product name, and the unit price. So you can see 78 by 3. Like further, I want to filter with using the where clause. So whatever you write the SQL query here, the same query can be written over here. So like I just say I want to put a where clause here, where I want to see only whose unit price is more than 20. So I'll just say where unit price is, I can just say less than 10. So I just want to filter it out. So when I run this query, what is that we are getting? Fine. So it is showing only the products whose price is less than 10. So I want to apply this. So that means I have further given here, okay, telling that I want to see this particular data. So only the product ID, name, and unit price from the products table. But at the same time, I want to apply the filter where unit price is less than 10. So when I run this particular query now, so you can see it will show me only those particular records whose price is less than 10. Yeah, so we have only 10 rows here, or 10, 11 rows whose price is only less than 10. So whatever the query we write it in the database, the same query can be written and it can be passed. So this engine will take this particular query, it will pass on to the respective server, database server. It'll try to make it understandable, and then the response, whatever it comes, it takes and then passes on to the data frame, and then we are printing the data frame. Okay,
Yes.
fine. So that is the read SQL command. See, read SQL table. This is going to, here I'm not specifying any kind of a query. We are specifying directly the table name. But in the case of read underscore SQL, we are specifying the query, SQL query. So based on the query's output will be retrieved and it will be filled into the data frame. Yeah. So now you can write even the joins, any this one, you can even refer to the views or any this one can be done in this one. Like I want to access the data from multiple tables. We have this concept of joins. So you want to read the joins, we can do those particular things. Like say example, I want to get even the category ID. Okay. So it is showing based on it is showing even the category ID. So now I don't want a category ID. Instead of category ID, I want to get the category name. Okay, so in that case, what is that we need to do? We need to write a joins for this. So a joins will be written in this way now. So for writing a joins, what is that we do? We just say select the data from the products table P, and I'll just say join with the categories table as C, and then I just want to get this particular category ID from the products table, and I also want to get the category name. So that means like I have a category table. So I'm just showing you. I just say select star from categories table. So when you see this particular command, so we have a category table. So in the category table, we have a category ID, name, and description. Fine. But in the products table, we just have only the category ID. So if you want to get the name of the category instead of category ID, okay, I can just replace this. Okay. So something. Um, I want to get the product ID, name, and unit price from the products table and the category name from the categories table. From, okay, since I'm joining between the two tables, I need to specify how these two tables are being related with each other. So I'll just say P dot common column in both the table is category ID is matching to the C dot category ID. So what it will do, this will try to create a join between the products table and the categories table based on this common column, that is category ID of the product table matching to the category ID of the categories table. Fine. So if I try to run this, so let us do, yeah, so no problem. With the filter also is fine. So I'm just running this join. So here you can see instead of showing the category ID, it is showing the name of the category. Now I want to write this same query, so you can just write this particular query. So now, since for the readability, this is actually a single line query, but for the readability, I have made this as a multi-lines. So now if I have to write this particular multiple lines, so what is that we can do? I can just say data frame is equal to pandas dot read SQL. So now since the query is in multiple lines, so if I have to write multi-line text, so we can use a triple quotes, no? And then I can write this particular query, and then in which engine. So since it is multiple lines, see, I can write it in a single line, but if it is in multi-line, I said like, it will be more readable. So I say select what are the columns you want to get, from which of the tables you want to get, how you want to join this particular tables, and based on what you're trying to filter. Since I have written this in multi-line, so we have seen in the very starting of the Python, so that if you want to write in multi-line text, we use a triple quotes. I've just used the triple quotes here to write this multiple lines of code. So now when I run this, okay, a data frame will be created based on this data, what we are seeing this output. Okay, because this particular query will be passed on to the database, the output will be taken and will be filled into my data frame. Now I'll print this particular data frame. So you can see here, so the same output, the product ID name, okay, instead of category ID, we are trying to get the category name. Order by, group by, subqueries, everything can be just used. Just like how you write a query in your database to fetch the data. So the same SQL query can be written, okay, and it can be passed to the data frame. When the data is very large and complex, people store the data in the databases. So, and to read the data from that particular database, so instead of getting the complete data, so we can just use this particular queries to get the information according to your requirements. Okay.
Yeah, sir.
So I think you have understood how do we read this particular thing. So that means if you're reading a specific table, so we have this method called as read SQL table. Now, if you want to read a particular query, okay, we have this particular read SQL, or we do also have what you call it as read SQL underscore query. Okay, this method also will work. Okay, so what happens when I talk about read SQL table? So it is to read the whole table, but if you want to read a part of the table, like based on the query, I want to write the data, read the data, then we use this read SQL query command. Fine. Now we have this particular read SQL table is to read the table, read SQL query is to read based on the query. The same way we have this particular read underscore SQL. So read underscore SQL is a wrapper class. So where in the read SQL, both a query as well as the table can be written. So like I say underscore query. See, now we can see the same, you'll get the output you're getting. So yeah, so yeah, it is reading this particular data. It is trying to fetch. See the previous command, 78 rows, that is the whole table. And this is my query. Based on the query, I'm trying to get the output. Now, when I say a table, you're mentioning the table. So you can say any table name, okay, that we can mention. Here, any query can be mentioned. Now, apart from all this, read SQL table and the read SQL query. So Python data frame has provided us with this called as a data frame dot read SQL pandas. I say data frame is equal to pandas dot read See, we have this particular thing here, read SQL and read SQL query. What is the difference? So here I can just write the queries, SQL queries. But in the case of read underscore SQL, this is the wrapper class, which contains the functionality of the query as well as the read SQL table. Okay, so when I say read underscore SQL, okay, here I can specify the table name. Say I want to see get the customers or products table itself. And then it has to know which engine. So you can see I'm able to read the table. Particular table names, okay, in the database, all the table names are stored in the lowercase. So when I use this particular read SQL, ensure that the table name is mentioned in the lowercase. Okay, so even though your SQL language is not case sensitive, but if I'm using this particular read SQL, this method will go to the database and then try to fetch the data and then works on that particular data. So we need to maintain this particular case convention. So we need to put in the lowercase. So it has been read. Print the data frame. So you can see this is going to read the whole table. So you want to read the customers table. So this is going to read the complete data from the customers table. So you can see we have 93 rows. Or I just want to write a query. So we can also say select star from the customers. Fine. So this also will work. From. Yeah, SQL command should be correct. It is getting the data. This is my customers table. So what I'm trying to get. So I want to get only some selected field, customer ID, and then I just say company name. So this is going to just get me only the customer ID and the company name of the customer. Okay. So I come up country, I just say is equal to Germany. Fine. So this will show me only the German customers. So where? From the customers table, I just say where country is equal to Germany. From the customers, where country. Okay, this is a SQL query. Okay, so I've just written, I say select the customer ID. So it is always better when you have a long query to write it in the triple quote so that okay, readability is good. From the customers, where, okay, since I'm opening there, write it like this. Yeah, so I just say select, these are columns from the customers table where country is matching to Germany. So this should work. Yeah. So this is showing all the customers from Germany, UK, USA, I think. Now you want to make this particular query as more dynamic, I can have a variable here and I can use a placeholder for that. So in this particular session, what is that we have studied here is, okay, how do we interact with the database? How do we read and write the data? Okay, how do we read the data from your databases? So if you have to interact with the database, so we use this particular library called as SQLalchemy is the library that we are using. Now this particular library, first thing what I need to do is we need to create an engine. Engine is responsible for establishing a connection to the database. Okay. So when you're establishing a connection to the database, we need to specify what type of provider that you are using, driver. Okay, so that means this depends on the type of database. If it is you're using a Oracle, this particular driver name will be different. If you're using a Microsoft SQL Server, see there are many databases in the market. So if you're connecting to a different databases, this particular driver will be different. Okay, the other information is we provide the authentication, the username and the password, and also the server name, in which server you are getting connected to. And here we are specifying the port number through which port we are trying to interact, and also the name of the database. So with the help of this information, okay, which you are providing to this particular method called as create engine, so this is going to create an engine, and again it will establish a connection to the database. Once a connection has been established, we have the different methods to interact with the database. So we have the three methods what we have studied here. So one is a SQL table, so where we mention the table and we get the complete data from that table into my data frame. Okay, once we read the data into the data frame, so later I can do all the operations what we have studied in the data frame. Okay, like pivot tables, or it might be you want to take this data frame and draw a graph, can be done. Apart from that, we do also have, okay, we have this particular read SQL table. The same way we have read SQL query. So in the case of a table, we are mentioning the table name, but in the case of read SQL query, we are mentioning the query, the SQL query, which is going to interact with the database and get the data. Now, apart from that, we do also have a wrapper method here called as read SQL. So read SQL, what it does is it has the functionality of the read SQL table as well as read SQL query. That means in the read SQL, I can mention the table name as well as I can mention the query. Okay, both can be written in the SQL. So that means before, what we used to do is, if I have to use a table, we used to use this method and pass the name of the table. If I have to write a query, get only some selected data, we used to call this method and then we used to write the query. So now you can use the same method, you can mention the table name. Now I say, no, I don't want the whole table, I want to get only some selected. So you can start writing this select from employees. Yeah, this query will work. Okay, so we can just continue. So, but before, we have to change from the table to query, and then we used to write this particular thing. Okay, this is about your database.